To Zanarkand, a Final Fantasy X fan-made audiobook project. Chapter 1. Welcome to Zanarkand. Tidus leaned against the cool metal of the locker, his arms folded, and doing his best to keep up a grin that was usually so easy to maintain. The room was alive with the usual pre-game bravado, shouting, joking, and the occasional clang of blitzball equipment being stuffed into lockers. The Zanarkand Abe's locker room had its own distinct atmosphere. The air smelled faintly of seawater and sweat, mingling with the sharp tang of the polished brass fixtures and dry, at least for now, neoprene uniforms. The Abe's uniform clung to the bodies of the rest of the team like a second skin, perfectly designed for underwater play. Bright golden yellow dominated the torso, streaked with panels of slate grey running down the sides and legs, reminiscent of some sort of sea creature. Each player wore their outfit like armour, a badge of belonging to the team everyone in Zanarkand adored. Tidus's own uniform followed the same colour scheme, but had a lot of his own customization to it. It was looser for starters, looking more like overalls with different length legs, the longer of which displaying the team insignia, a stylized letter J. He glanced at his reflection in the mirror inside the locker. Sun-bleached hair spiked out in every direction, and his tanned face, though usually framed with the easy confidence of a showman, had a turmoil beneath the surface tonight. Because tonight was the Jekt Memorial Cup. Kirill, the team's oldest veteran, and the only current member to have played with Tidus's father back in the day, sat on the bench closest to Tidus, adjusting his gloves. Being 27 was still considered quite young in Zanarkand, but not for the top-performing athletes on the city's blitzball teams. Kirill had been planning on retiring a few years ago, but the prospect of playing in the Jekt Memorial Cup was too much, let alone the idea of winning it, even if it meant being a decade older than the team captain. "You've been quiet tonight, Tidus," Kirill said as he splayed his fingers, pretending to check the grip, his voice low enough to not carry over the chatter. He didn't push further, but instead eyed Tidus from where he sat. "Saving my energy for the game, old man. You should try it sometime." Tidus deflected with a quick smirk. Kirill chuckled, the sound low but false, before shifting his attention to his boots, tugging at the laces with deliberate care. He didn't press further, knowing when to give Tidus his space. Kirill had been around long enough to read the room, the team's unofficial anchor both on and off the sphere pool. His steady presence was as much a part of the pre-game rituals as the warm-ups. Across the room, Toma leaned back against the lockers, his wiry frame loose and relaxed, grinning like he already had the game in the bag. His dark hair was still damp from warm-ups earlier, sticking to his forehead as he jabbed a finger toward Naya, who was sitting cross-legged on the bench beside him. "You wouldn't last till half-time and goal. It's a lot tougher than you'd think, right, Kirill?" he called over, his tone light but laced with enough challenge to spark a reaction. Kirill didn't even look up. He shook his head and jokingly called back, "Hey, I'm not getting involved here, guys. Eyes on the prize." Naya rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smirk from Toma. She shoved her towel into her bag with exaggerated force. "That's rich," she said, "coming from the guy who missed 3 passes in the last game. Maybe you should be taking notes." Luperis, perched on a nearby bench like a mischievous bird, cackled as he threw in his 2 gil. "Don't worry, Toma, you've got the better hair. That's got to count for something, right?" His bright green headband, barely containing his unruly mop of blonde hair, seemed to bounce with his laughter. He lived for stirring the pot, thriving on the tension he created with a well-placed quip. Tidus could see the way it lit a fire under people, so he let it carry on. "Better hair doesn't win games, genius," Naya shot back, grabbing her water bottle and chucking it lightly in Luperis' direction. He caught it with a mock flourish and flashed a toothy grin, clearly delighted to have gotten under her skin. Meanwhile, Shaft paced to the room's edge, his boots clunking softly against the tiled floor. His lips moved soundlessly, eyes locked on some invisible point ahead. The team had long since stopped trying to decipher his pre-game mantras. Whatever he was muttering seemed to do the trick, though. It kept him sharp. His laser focus in the sphere pool was almost unnerving at times. Occasionally it would be suggested he's tapping into some kind of magic, but no one really wanted to be the one to ask him. He was like a machine in the water, and Titus sometimes even wondered if Shaft could hear the rest of them when he got into one of these zones. On the opposite side of the room, Suzam and Ketan sat shoulder to shoulder, bent over a tablet screen that displayed a diagram of the sphere pool. Ketan gestured animatedly, his broad hand tracing routes and plays, while Suzam nodded along, her expression calm but intent. She was always the quiet strategist, balancing out Ketan's boisterous energy with her sharp mind and even sharper instincts. They were a good team. Edith's team. Watching them now, he felt a brief flicker of pride, but the laughter and the camaraderie barely registered with him. Tonight it was as much a part of the background noise as the sounds from the stadium echoing through the walls. His mind kept drifting, specifically to his father. To Jecht. The grinning goatee and wild mane of hair kept at bay by his signature red bandana loomed in his head unshakable. Memories of the crowd roaring his name, of that smug, arrogant glint in his eye that seemed to dominate every room he entered. Jecht had been a titan, both in the sphere pool and in life, casting shadows so deep Titus had spent a decade trying to claw his way out of them. And yet, even now, even after all the years of anger and resentment, tonight Jecht was everywhere. His name on the posters, his face on the big screen outside the stadium, his name being chanted through the walls. Titus may have been the star player tonight, but it was Jecht's name on everyone's lips. "Can you believe this?" Luperis asked. He was one of the newer players with perpetually wide eyes and too much energy at times. His voice cut through the racket of the locker room. "We're actually playing the Jecht Memorial Cup. The guy was like a legend, right? Man, I remember seeing him play when I was a kid." Titus froze mid-motion, fingers tightening around the strap on his belt. He didn't need to look up. He felt the subtle shift in the room, the way conversations quietened, the way Kirill glanced toward him from the corner of his eye. Naya's laugh trailed off mid-sound, her gaze flicking toward Titus. But Luperis, oblivious as ever, kept going. And when he disappeared, that was the craziest thing, man. My dad was losing it, like, "Where's Jecht? What happened?" Luperis shook his head, grinning a little at the memory. Then he turned toward Titus, wide-eyed and earnest. "Hey, Titus, dude, what was it like, growing up with him as your dad? That had to be something else." For a second, the locker room seemed to hold its breath. Kirill shifted on the bench, his lips parting as though he was about to cut in. But Titus beat him to it. "My old man?" Titus started with a distracted chuckle, waving a hand as if brushing off the weight of the question. "He was great, taught me everything he knows. Always had time to practice with me. Even took me fishing down by the bay a whole bunch." His tone was light, but the undercurrent of something deeper wasn't hard to catch. In fact, it was there in spades. "Wait, really?" Luperis blinked, momentarily caught off guard. The sarcasm had, somehow, by some miracle, flown right over his head. "Like, what was he like at home and—" "Luperis," Kirill cut in with a note of finality. It was the perfect speed bump for Luperis, as he paused, glanced around the room, and caught the look on everyone's face. The subtle wince from Naya, the way Toma suddenly found something fascinating about his gloves. "Oh," Luperis shrank back slightly, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Didn't mean to, yeah, got it, my bad." Titus turned back to his locker, feeling a little bad for the sarcasm. "Don't sweat it, rookie," he said without looking up, his voice deliberately casual. "Now, focus on the game. That's what matters, right?" The tension in the room began to ease, the silence replaced by the low hum of conversation as the others returned to their routines. Kirill clapped Luperis on the shoulder and muttered something about learning when to shut up, eliciting a sheepish grin from the rookie. Titus stayed quiet, his grin fading as he adjusted his gloves yet again, his mind wandering despite himself. His fingers brushed the pendant at his neck, the same stylized J, cool against his skin. The room around him seemed to blur for a moment as memories surfaced. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head and forcing himself back into the present. Titus? Naya called over, her voice softer than usual. Game starts in 10. You coming? Titus hadn't even noticed them all approaching the door. He nodded without looking back. Yeah, just give me a sec. The others began filing out, the sounds of their footsteps and voices fading as they left the locker room. Kirill lingered for a moment by the door. Don't let him get in your head. You're not playing for him, not tonight. Tonight you're playing for the Abes. He lingered at the door on those words for a moment before something caught his eye outside and he chuckled, casting a knowing glance back toward Titus. Oh, man, Titus, your biggest fans here, he said with a grin, vanishing down the hall before Titus could shoot back a comment. The sound of hurried footsteps followed, soft and quick, and Titus braced himself for what had become something of its own pre-game ritual. He turned just as a blur of pink hair darted into the room, resolving into the small, beaming figure of Kaiko. Her oversized Zanarkand Abe's jersey, bright gold and blue with the big J logo splashed across the chest, hung off her small frame like an oversized dress. The emblem was iconic now, a symbol adopted by the team in Jack's honor after his disappearance at sea 10 years ago. But Titus couldn't stop his mind from drifting back further to his father standing on the beach with the same mark inked into his chest, a cocky grin stretched across his face. The J had started as nothing more than Jack's ego tattooed in ink. Now it was everywhere, on posters, banners, jerseys, even stitched into the fabric of Titus's life, proverbially. Instinctively, his hand drifted to his necklace again. He hadn't taken it off in years, though he wasn't sure if it was out of respect or simply because it was easier than explaining to his fans why he'd removed it. Tonight, it felt heavier than ever. Titus! Kaiko's voice broke through his thoughts, bright and energetic as ever. She clutched a blitzball in her hands, its glossy surface nearly too big for her to hold. The jersey she wore, one of those cheap fan knockoffs, only made her more endearing. Fans didn't actually care that blitzball players didn't wear jerseys, that their swim gear colours were what defined them as teams. To the fans, wearing those oversized shirts was a badge of devotion. He forced a smile, one that felt more real when he saw the excitement shining in her eyes. Kaiko, he said, his tone light. You sneaking past security again? I'm going to start recognizing you soon, you know. She giggled, her short pink hair bouncing with the movement. They won't catch me, I'm way too fast. Besides, I had to come. It's a Jack Memorial Cup. And you're playing, dummy. His hand lingered on the pendant for a moment longer before he let it fall, the chain clinking softly against his chest. That I am, he said with just a hint more of exasperation than he intended. What, you here to give me a pep talk or steal my spotlight? Kaiko thrust the blitzball forward. Neither, silly. I need you to sign this, for my little brother. Your little brother, huh? Titus quipped, taking the ball and uncapping a marker he kept for such occasions. Either you've got a dozen little brothers, or he's making a killing selling these. Her face scrunched up in mock offence, and he laughed, scribbling his name across the ball's bumpy blue and white surface with a flourish. He handed the blitzball back to her. You ready to watch us win tonight? She nodded enthusiastically. I know you'll do great. You're the best, Titus. He forced a chuckle, but it nearly turned into a sigh he was tempted to release. He never got used to the overzealous fans. Although, in fairness, Kaiko couldn't really be called just a fan, they saw each other so often. Thanks, kid. Now, you better get back to your seat before they realize you're in here. Kaiko obediently turned to leave, but got as far as the door before pausing to look back. Hey, Titus? You think you could ever show me and my brother how to blitz like you? Maybe show us how you guys hold your breath for so long. We're going to play this weekend. You could come too. Titus was caught off guard by the question. He had no idea how to respond. A young boy in purple hooded robes finally spoke up from the corner of the room, his voice calm and knowing. You can't this weekend. Titus glanced at the boy, then back to Kaiko. Maybe some other time? Soon, I promise. A huge grin crept across Kaiko's face. You're the best, Titus. As Kaiko darted out the door, the echo of her hurried footsteps faded quickly into the buzz of the stadium beyond. Titus stood still for a moment, his smile slipping into a faint frown. He appreciated his fans, their energy, their loyalty, but tonight he just couldn't shake the feeling that had come over him. He sighed and forced himself into a light jog on the spot to get himself in the right frame of mind and try to shake off the slump all mentions of Jecht had put him in. Shaking it off, he pushed open the door, stepping into the corridor that would take him into the arena. The walls here were stark, the grey slate lit by bright overhead lights. He remembered walking these corridors for the first time years ago, trying to keep up with his dad's long strides as Jecht showed his kid around the stadium. He just remembered thinking at the time that if he had stopped walking, Jecht wouldn't notice. Back then, the sheer scale of the stadium had felt overwhelming, its walls humming with the vibrations of the cheering crowd. He remembered Jecht's raspy laugh echoing off its tiles, the strength of his hand firm around Titus's smaller one, his father's voice rumbling with promises of glory. Now the corridor felt colder, the air thick with the distant roar of the crowd. Titus's boots struck the tiled floor with a steady rhythm, the sound grounding him as memories threatened to rise too fast. He passed by old posters lining the walls, their edges curling slightly with age. Most were new, but a few, worn and faded, still bore Jecht's likeness as if deliberately left up out of respect. They probably were, actually, Titus thought. His father's goateed face stared back at him, larger than life, the cocky grin eternal. Titus tore his gaze away, his fingers brushing the pendant again without thought. The corridor opened into the players' tunnel, the stadium's pulse hitting him like a physical force. The roar of tens of thousands of fans swept over him, a cacophony of cheers, chants, and drums reverberating through the stadium. The air was electric, heavy with the anticipation and the mingling sense of salt water and ozone from the massive sphere pool, itself held in place with giant rotating rings that swung around it, electricity arcing between them and the water. Titus had never fully understood how the huge sphere of water was kept floating in place, but he was glad it did. As he stepped forward, the vibrations in the floor beneath his boots grew stronger, each step drawing him closer to the heart of it all. The stadium opened up before him, vast and radiant. The floodlights blazed down onto the huge shimmering sphere of water floating in the center of the arena, its surface rippling softly with the faint movements of the opposing team, the Zanarkand Duggles, in their striking crimson gear. The colours clashed against the deep blue of the water, the scene alive with movement and tension. Titus's eyes swept the arena, drinking in the sight of the crowd. Banners waved like rippling flames in the stands, painted faces screaming names, their cheers nearly indistinguishable from the general roar. Somewhere in that mass of people, Kaiko was probably waving her blitzball like a maniac. He almost smiled at the thought. High above on the VIP platform overlooking the pool, a figure stepped forward, commanding the crowd's attention. The roar tapered off, giving way to a murmur of expectation as the mayor of Zanarkand raised his broad hands. The man was in his 40s, thick-shouldered and confident, his voice carrying with the authority of someone who had once earned cheers of his own in this very stadium as a player for the Jimmers of B West. "Citizens of Zanarkand!" boomed Mayor Garvin Zale, his voice amplified but rich enough to cut through the air. "Tonight we gather for more than just a simple game of blitzball. This, the Jecht Memorial Cup." He was immediately cut off by the roar of the crowd at the mention of Jecht's name, and feigned surprise at the interruption with a well-graced smile. Titus's chest tightened, his hand twitching toward the necklace yet again. He kept it still, his gaze steady, but the noise reverberated in his ribs, the cheers a reminder of the shadow looming over him. The mayor nodded with the cries, holding his hands up against the tide of the noise as he ploughed on with his speech. "Yes, yes, the Jecht Memorial Cup, a celebration of the sport that unites us all, and of the man who defined it." He smiled broadly, pacing the platform with the ease of someone used to the limelight. 10 years ago, he said, voice dipping slightly, when the news broke, I remember my son and I stayed up all night talking about Jecht and Blitzball. He paused, then chuckled to himself. Funny thing, we'd barely said 2 words to each other all week. He was in that moody phase, you know. But that night we just talked about goals Jecht had scored, the time he punched a reporter, the whole deal. That's how big a deal he was to us. To all of us, I think. We even made cocoa that night. Burned the first batch, had to use that awful imported stuff. Tasted like pennies. The crowd laughed politely. Zale smiled, briefly lost in it. I don't even remember what time we went to bed. Might have been morning already, just one of those nights you don't plan, but it sticks with you. He blinked, seeming to catch himself. Whoa, didn't mean to get all misty-eyed on you folks. That's the power of this game, though. It brings people together. The crowd laughed, the tension easing momentarily. The mayor gestured toward the players gathered around the edge of the sphere pool on a raised platform, the Duggles still dripping after just climbing back out from a warm-up. Speaking of sons, Jecht's own flesh and blood is here tonight. Titus! He swept an arm out grandly, and the crowd's roar swelled to an almost deafening level, this time carrying Titus's name on the tide. Titus forced his face into a confident smile, lifting a hand in acknowledgement. The floodlights reflected off his pendant as he raised his arm, a glint of silver catching his eye. He held the pose a moment longer than necessary, even as the mayor continued on with his rambling speech, letting the cheers wash over him, even as his chest tightened further. But I think I've spoken enough for now, the mayor said, catching himself. So may luck be on your side, and may the best team win. Time to blitz, he continued with a raised fist. He let the deafening swell of the crowd surround him before lowering his hand and stepping back with a final nod. The noise of the crowd cascaded in waves as the players prepared to take their positions. Titus's heart was pounding, not from nerves or adrenaline, but from something heavier. Shaking it off, he stepped forward to join his team at the edge of the pool, the shimmering water reflecting the lights above. Before the buzzer sounded, Titus's eyes were pulled towards something he saw, or thought he saw at least. Something or someone standing in the crowds. At that instant, however, the buzzer sounded, sharp and commanding, yanking Titus out of his thoughts and snapping him back to the present. The signal reverberated around the stadium, its clarity cutting through the thunderous roar of the crowd. His body moved instinctively, every muscle coiled and ready as he launched himself into the pool head first. The water slammed over him, cold and heavy, silencing the world outside. He opened his eyes and everything was a shimmering blue-green haze, the distant shapes of players cutting through it like predators on the hunt. The ball floated ready at the center of the pool. Both teams exploded into action, surging toward it in a blur of powerful strokes and kicks. Titus shot forward, his body slicing through the resistance with the ease of a dolphin, arms cutting through the water like blades. Faster. Closer. He reached the ball just as a player from the Duggles did, their hands colliding in a brief struggle. Titus twisted his body, using his momentum to wrench the ball free. His feet snapped back, driving a powerful kick that shot the ball toward Naya. She caught it mid-stroke, pivoted, passed it to Toma, who darted forward and caught it with a roll. The Duggles counterattacked. A flash of red streaked through the water. A forward snatched the ball from Toma's grasp. Titus was already moving, his body reacting on instinct. He cut across the pool, his strokes powerful and efficient. His lungs burned, but he ignored it. Closer. Coiled like a spring, he launched himself at the forward, his shoulders slamming into their side with unrelenting force. The impact was a thunderclap in the water, sending shockwaves rippling outward as the Duggles player was launched out of the edge of the pool and into the stands amidst the stunned gasps of the crowd. With the knobbly blitzball in hand, Titus took a second to cast a smug nod in their direction, his trademark grin daring anyone to challenge him, before diving back into the chaos of the game without missing a beat. A flash of crimson in the water pulled him back to his senses as another Douglas forward advanced on him like a shark. No time to think. He spun, kicked hard. It arced beautifully, but was intercepted before Kirill could lay hands on it. The Douglas defender wasted no time, twisting their body to whip the ball back toward their midfield. Naya was already moving, her lithe frame cutting through the water with astonishing speed. She closed the gap in seconds, blocking the pass with a calculated kick that sent the ball drifting free. The water erupted in chaos as both teams scrambled for control, but Luperis was quicker. His powerful stroke carried him through the fray, and with a daring lunge, he snatched the ball just before another Douglas player could reach it. Luperis didn't hold onto it for long. He spun sharply, evading an incoming tackle, and spotted Titus already positioning himself near the Douglas goal. The pass was fast, almost reckless, but accurate. The ball arced through the water toward Titus, who was waiting like a predator ready to strike. He caught it in both hands with perfect timing. The Douglas keeper stiffened in anticipation, but Titus's grin flashed as he darted forward, the goal tantalizingly within reach. He gripped the ball tightly, his sharp gaze locking onto the goal. The Douglas keeper floated in tense anticipation, their body coiled like a spring, ready to pounce. But Titus had no intention of giving them the chance. With a quick twist, he kicked the ball directly upward, sending it rocketing toward the upper surface. The sphere breached with a spray of shimmering droplets, and Titus was right behind it, his body propelling upward like a fish, breaking free of the ocean's depths. The roar of the crowd slammed into him as he burst from the water, the sound a living, pulsing force. For a brief moment, he hung in the air, weightless, suspended between the chaos of the pool below and the electric frenzy of the stadium around him. Time seemed to stretch, each second elongated as he twisted his body mid-air. Muscles tightened, every movement precise as he coiled into position for a breathtaking bicycle kick. The ball descended, and his leg whipped out like a striking viper. His foot connected with the blitzball in a powerful, fluid motion. The impact was explosive, the force driving the ball downward like a meteor plunging to earth. Streaked back into the pool, cutting through the water with unstoppable velocity, and slammed into the back of the Douglas goal with a resounding thud. A horn blared, its triumphant sound almost drowned out by the deafening roar of the crowd. Fans leapt to their feet, their cheers shaking the very walls of the stadium. The shot had been so fast, Titus hadn't even landed in the water yet. His body curved back downward, gravity pulling him as if reluctant to let go of the moment. He hit the pool with a splash, the cool embrace of the water swallowing him as his heart pounded in his chest. This time, though, the sound of the crowd didn't fade as he submerged. In fact, it grew louder, the stomps and the shouts coming through the water itself, vibrating the very core of the sphere pool. Titus could feel it in his bones. Blinking against the hazy blue, he tried to make out the crowd through the water's distorted lens, but the shapes around him swayed and blurred. His stomach dropped. He couldn't say what it was, but there was something not normal about it. Something wrong. Ignoring the game, he swam toward the nearest surface of the sphere, his strokes urgent. Breaking the water tension, he gasped for air, expecting to hear cheers again. But instead he was met with screams. The roar of the crowd had transformed into something primal, chaotic and terrifying. No one was watching the game. The stands were in turmoil, people surging toward the exits in a frantic wave. Titus turned in confusion, his brow furrowing just as a deafening boom ripped through the air. His head snapped toward the source, an explosion somewhere outside the stadium. A flash of flames lit up the night, casting an orange glow that spilled into the open-topped arena. The reflection shimmered off the water's surface like fire as the vibrations reached even here, shaking the structure. Then came the sound of debris, Distant at first, then closer, raining down from the stadium's upper framework, chunks of metal and concrete dislodged by the shockwave. Titus's heart raced as he scanned the sphere pool, catching the wide-eyed stares of his teammates, the Abes frozen in place as they looked to him. He raised his hand, his fingers displaying a signal every blitzer knew instinctively. Get out. The team moved as one, surging toward the edges of the sphere pool and hauling themselves out with urgent strokes. And not a moment too soon, the electromechanism suspending the pool in place gave a sputtering groan and the water began to shift unnaturally. Slowly at first, then faster, it started to drain as gravity began to affect it again, sloshing downward in uneven waves. At a glance, it seemed all of the players made it out, thankfully. The once pristine sphere began collapsing inward, a cascading whirlpool forming in the centre. Titus climbed out onto the platform that circled around, his eyes darting to the stands. Chaos. People were screaming, pushing, clawing for the exits as chunks of debris rained down, forcing those below to dodge and stumble. A low rumble shook the stadium, threatening more destruction. Yet amid the panic, Titus spied one crimson-clad figure stood perfectly still in the stands, unmoving, calm and watching. "Cap, what's going on?" Luperis's voice cut through the din, his voice fearful. Titus's gaze lingered on the figure for a beat longer before turning back to his men. "I don't know," he said, his tone sharper than he intended, "but we need to move. Now!" He pointed toward the stands, his voice rising to cut through the noise. "Get into the crowd! Help them evacuate! Go, go, go!" The players, all of them, both teams, nodded and scrambled down from their platforms, vaulting over railings and sprinting toward the panicked masses. Titus spared one more glance toward the crimson figure to see they were gone, before shaking his head and clambering down from the player's platform, his boots slipping slightly on the slick surface as he leapt into the frenzy. Around him, the stadium was pure pandemonium. Panicked screams cut through the deafening roar of distant explosions. The orange glow of flames flickered across the walls and the sea of terrified faces. He pushed through the surging crowd, dodging bodies and falling crumbs of debris alike, his heart pounding as he surveyed the scene. In the middle of the stands, Titus caught sight of Kirill and Toma struggling to lift a jagged chunk of concrete off a screaming woman's leg. Her cries were sharp and desperate, cutting through the noise as the two blitzers gritted their teeth, their muscles straining. "We've got you! Hang on!" Toma shouted, his usual cocky grin replaced by sheer determination. The debris shifted slightly, and with a final heave they freed her, dragging her to safety as more rubble rained down from above. Each new explosion outside sent tremors through the stadium, the open roof glowing brighter with every blast. More debris tumbled from the collapsing structure, striking chairs and scattering the panicked crowd further. Titus could hear snatches of voices around him. "What's happening? Come this way! Don't stop! Keep moving!" blending into the cacophony of fear. He pushed further into the chaos, his eyes darting frantically until he caught a flash of pink in the distance. Heiko. She was hunched over, clutching her signed blitzball to her chest, her bright hair unmistakable even amidst the chaos. Her face was pale with terror, and she flinched with every jostle as the crowd surged around her, knocking her to the ground without a second glance. Her small frame disappeared briefly in the stampede, and Titus's chest tightened. "Kaiko!" he shouted, his voice lost in the din. He shoved his way forward, his focus narrowing entirely on her. She struggled to her knees, but the tide of bodies pressed against her relentlessly. Just as he started to fight his way through the crowd, a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. Titus spun sharply, his arm halfway raised to push whoever it was away, but froze when he saw the figure standing before him. The man was clad in long, flowing crimson robes, tied at the waist, the intricate gold details on his shoulder glinting faintly in the firelight. His stance was casual, yet commanding, one hand resting on the hilt of a massive blade slung over his shoulder, his other arm resting inside the robe, making no use of the sleeve. He was older, his hair streaked with grey, face weathered and stern, and his dark sunglasses reflected the chaos around them. The man's expression was calm, unnervingly so. "Come with me," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying an air of authority that brooked no argument. Titus didn't budge. He pointed a finger at the man's chest, his jaw tight with suspicion. "Oren! I knew it was you!" he snapped. "So what's going on? What are you doing?" "There's no time," Oren interrupted, his tone sharp as yet another explosion rocked the stadium, the ground beneath them trembling violently. "You cannot help these people. Here is the safest place for them." He seemed frustrated at having to explain this and just wanted to get going as soon as possible. "Then where are we going?" Titus demanded, his breath coming hot and fast. "There's no time to explain," Oren repeated, his voice steady even as the chaos around them swelled. "We need to move." Titus's fists were clenched. "Listen, old man, I don't know what your deal is, but I'm not going anywhere. These people need help." He gestured toward the stands, his voice rising with frustration. Oren, however, took a step closer, his face now inches from Titus's. The chaos around them seemed to dim. "Jack sent me," he said, just audible enough as if afraid anyone would hear him over the noise. The name hit Titus like a physical blow. He recoiled, his mind racing, too many questions flooding in at once to form a coherent thought. The world around him seemed to blur and mute. Another explosion could be heard outside, this one much closer, its flames glinting in the reflection of Oren's sunglasses. Titus had barely heard it, but the tremor snapped him back to reality. "Now move!" Oren barked, stepping back with a swish of his robes. He turned sharply, the massive blade shifting on his shoulder as he strode away, his movements swift and purposeful. Titus hesitated, his eyes darting back to where Kaiko had been moments ago. She was gone, swallowed by the crowd. His chest tightened, but the sound of another distant boom spurred him into motion. Gritting his teeth, he followed Oren, his heart pounding as he leapt over broken seats and scattered rubble, unsure of what awaited him, but unable to turn back. The tunnel leading out of the arena was suffocating, the press of bodies squeezing the air from his lungs, but as they emerged onto the wide boulevard outside, the scene only grew worse. People surged in all directions, some crying, others shouting, their faces lit intermittently by the fiery glow of destruction further up the city. The cold night air hit Titus like a slap, along with the acrid scent of burning. Titus's breath caught as he took it all in, his stomach twisting with unease. Realizing Oren hadn't stopped walking, he jumped back into gear, taking off after him as he heard all the people around him. A small child somewhere was giving a long, heartbreaking scream for their mommy, but amidst the screams, two people nearby shouted something that dropped the bottom out of Titus's stomach. "It's on the North Shore!" one of them cried. "It's attacking the city!" another shouted, pushing past Titus as if their life depended on it. His heart raced, and he stumbled slightly, catching himself against a nearby rail. "Oren!" he yelled over the din, trying to make sense of the chaos. "What's going on? What's attacking the city?" Oren didn't respond. He didn't even look back. His grip shifted on the massive sword resting on his shoulder, the blade catching the flickering light of the fires above. He moved with a calm detachment, as though the panicked throng of people surging around him didn't exist. Frustrated, Titus pushed after him, his feet pounding against the pavement as they moved past the stadium's main gates. The towering buildings outside the stadium blocked any view of the coastline, but one of the taller skyscrapers nearby caught his attention. Its gleaming facade was marred, a massive chunk blown out of its middle. Smoke poured from the wound, illuminated by the fiery orange glow within. Titus stared at it, his stomach twisting with unease. Oren's pace never faltered, his steps deliberate yet unhurried as they pushed through the crowd. "What's with the sword?" Titus called out, gesturing toward the massive blade, not that Oren could see. His voice was laced with sarcasm and frustration. As expected, Oren remained silent. He adjusted the sword slightly, as if in response, the weight of it seemingly nothing to him, and continued his march through the streets. Titus gritted his teeth and quickened his pace, dodging and weaving through the frightened masses. Just as he began to think Oren wasn't going to stop, the older man abruptly turned down a narrow side street. The sharpness of the turn caught Titus off guard, and he nearly missed it, skidding to a halt before darting after him. The side street was eerily quiet, devoid of people, the noise of the crowd muffled behind them. Titus jogged to catch up. "What's going on?" he demanded again. his voice bouncing off the metal walls of the alleyway. Oren finally spoke, his voice gravelly and measured. "We need to get to higher ground." Titus frowned, confusion etched across his face. "Higher ground? Why?" They reached a flight of metal steps, Oren climbing them two at a time with ease. Titus followed, his boots clanging loudly against the steps as they ascended onto the city's steel and concrete pedestrian overpass. The walkway wove between the tall buildings, suspended just above the streets to allow people to avoid the congested traffic below. Normally, there would be all sorts of vendors up here, but now it was deserted. Titus reached the top and paused, his breath catching as he looked out over to Zanarkand. Zanarkand was a city that seemingly stretched endlessly. It was a sprawling metropolis of gleaming glass and steel. It was often said that Zanarkand never slept. Its skyscrapers were usually bathed in neon lights and holographic advertisements, and its streets glowed with an iridescent energy. Being an island city, water was woven into its very design, shimmering canals, fountains, and even terraced waterfalls. But tonight, Zanarkand was a war zone, under assault from an unseen enemy. Smoke rose in thick plumes from multiple points across the city, and fires flickered like scattered beacons of destruction. The bright lights of Zanarkand were dimmed, overshadowed by carnage and ruin. Through the gaps between buildings, Titus could see more explosions lighting up the north shore, but not what was causing it. Not yet. Oren kept walking, taking the walkway northbound, his stride unbroken as he moved along the overpass. Titus jogged to get ahead of him, spinning around to block his path. "All right, that's enough. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what the hell is going on." Oren stopped, his gaze steady and unyielding. Slowly, the hand he held his blade steady with moved, hauling it down from his shoulder. The massive blade gleamed in the dim light as he held it steady in front of him with both hands now, the weight of it seemingly effortless in his grasp. Titus stepped back, his voice faltering. "What are you doing?" Oren's tone was calm but firm. "Get behind me." Before Titus could form a response, he heard a clicking noise behind him. He turned and froze. There, in the middle of the overpass, were six black creatures. Titus had never seen anything like them. Each one was bigger than a large dog, with what had looked like thick wings and ferociously gnashing teeth. Each one had several glowing eyes. One of them crouched low, its wings glowing faintly before a spike shot out from its body, aimed directly at Titus. And then, in mid-air, it stopped. Without warning, the world fell silent. The shift was so sudden, it made Titus stop in his tracks. The sound of screams and explosions vanished, snuffed out like a flame. Even the hum of the overpass beneath their feet was gone. It wasn't just quiet, it was absolute silence, a vacuum of sound so unnatural it set Titus's nerves alight. He looked around, his heart pounding in the eerie stillness. The smoke in the air hung frozen, unmoving, as if caught in some invisible stasis. Titus could even see particles of ash suspended mid-fall, glinting faintly in the dim light. "What the?" he muttered, his voice the only sound in this now dead world. His own words felt alien and intrusive, as though they didn't belong in this frozen moment. Oren had stopped too, standing utterly still, but in a pose that indicated he was lunging forward, both hands gripping the handle of his large blade. By all rights, he shouldn't have remained standing in such an unbalanced pose, but everything was hanging in the air. Even his crimson robes were unnaturally stiff as they stayed motionless. Titus felt a chill creep up his spine as he turned in a circle, scanning the world still around him. And then, behind him, a voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Begins." Titus spun on his heel, his breath catching as his eyes landed on a figure standing a few feet away. It was the boy from the locker room, the one in the purple hooded robes. His face was calm, his expression almost serene amidst the frozen chaos. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood as though he'd always been part of this frozen scene. "You!" Tidus stammered, pointing at him. "What's going on? What is this?" He hated how stupid and repetitive the question sounded, but he couldn't help himself. Nothing about this made any sense. The boy tilted his head slightly, the gaze piercing yet oddly comforting. "Don't cry," he said softly, his voice carrying an inexplicable weight. Tidus frowned, his confusion deepening. "What the hell does that mean?" he started. But before he could finish, a sudden noise behind him broke the spell. It started as a low hum, like a building engine, and then swelled into the sharp, grating sound of metal scraping against metal. Tidus whirled around just in time to have his field of vision blocked by Orin's blade in a clash of steel as it deflected the barbs thrown by the creature. The force of the deflection sent Tidus stumbling backwards, his arms flailing to keep his balance. "Pay attention!" Orin barked, his voice cutting through the renewed noise like a whip. Tidus glanced back over his shoulder, searching for the boy, but he was gone. The space where he'd stood was empty, as though he'd never been there at all. Tidus had no time to protest what had just happened. One of the creatures from earlier landed heavily on the overpass, its wings spreading wide as it bared its gnashing teeth. The smoke that had been frozen in the air now swirled violently, the suspended ash cascading like falling snow. The screams returned, the explosions resumed, and the world came back to life in an instant. With a few swift steps, Orin lunged forward past Tidus, raising his blade again. He swung it, wide and heavy, cleaving through the air with a whistle. The first creature didn't stand a chance. Its body split cleanly in two before fading into the air, releasing floating orbs of light. Another lunged at him, claws outstretched, but Orin sidestepped effortlessly, driving his blade point down into its chest mid-air. It let out a guttural shriek before crumpling to the ground. A third tried to flank him, but Orin pivoted, his movements deceptively slow yet precise. The blade came down like an executioner's axe, slicing clean through the creature's head. Black ichor sprayed across the metal walkway before it too faded to nothing. The remaining creatures seemed to hesitate, their wings twitching. Orin didn't wait. He stepped forward again, his blade carving a brutal arc that cleaved the last two beasts in half with a single powerful swing. Taking a second to absorb what he just saw, Tidus wiped the back of his hand across his forehead, his breath still coming hard from the encounter. He had seen fiends before, but never like this. He glanced at Orin, the older man standing tall amidst the carnage, his crimson robes barely ruffled. Orin turned, his expression calm and unreadable, but his words came with unmistakable authority. "We keep moving, yeah, I know," Tidus finished for him exasperatedly, as he trudged forward, falling in step behind him and swallowing the protest that wanted to rise in his throat. After what he'd just seen, questioning Orin seemed futile. Instead, he gestured toward the massive sword. "You got another one of those lying around?" he asked, his voice laced with a mix of sarcasm and seriousness. Orin paused for half a second, then let out a low chuckle, dark and knowing. He didn't answer, but just kept walking, his boots clinking against the steel of the overpass. Tidus sighed, glancing around nervously as they pressed on. Whatever those creatures were, there was probably more of them, and his empty hands didn't feel particularly comforting. Then it happened. A deafening boom of twisting metal and shattering glass tore through the air above them, shaking the overpass violently. Tidus instinctively ducked, throwing his arms over his head as a massive plume of fire and debris erupted from a nearby skyscraper. Shards of glass and chunks of metal rained down, clattering against the steel walkway. Tidus squinted through the haze of smoke and falling debris, his stomach twisting as he saw something that didn't belong. High up on the building, a massive appendage was now embedded. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Long, sinuous, and writhing with grotesque life. It was a tentacle, not unlike the kind he'd seen on some of the larger catches down by the docks, The tip of the tentacle swelled, though, and peeled back like the skin of a banana. Underneath, rows of jagged scales were revealed, but they did not stay there. One by one, the scales detached, falling in a cascade like deadly rain. "Look out!" Titus shouted, diving out of the way. Oren stood his ground, watching them rain down over the rim of his sunglasses. The sound of metal crunching and screeching filled the air as the scales embedded themselves into the steel and concrete. Sparks flew as some bounced off the walkway, leaving jagged grooves behind, while others pierced straight through with terrifying precision. Titus barely had time to catch his breath when the first scale began to move. It twisted and unfolded, the outer layer peeling back to reveal a creature inside. There, on the overpass, the scales transformed one by one into the same winged horrors Oren had just dispatched. Their gnashing teeth glinted under the flickering lights of the fires of the city, their glowing eyes locking onto Titus and Oren with a feral hunger. Wings stretched outward from their segmented shells, forming jagged, dark appendages. There was easily 24 this time. Oren shifted his stance, his sword coming down from his shoulder in a slow, deliberate arc. His lips curled into a grim smirk. "Some can't wait to die," he said, his voice calm but sharp. With a powerful swing, he lunged forward, blade cleaving through the first of the creatures with a brutal slash that sent its body tumbling off the overpass. Another leapt at him, wings beating violently, but Oren swung heavily, smacking it with the flat of the blade and sending it too flying over the side. He sidestepped smoothly, his movements deceptively quick for someone his size, and drove the large blade through a third creature's torso, impaling it to the steel walkway in a moment of what felt like déjà vu for Titus. He slid the blade out swiftly, with a grind of metal as the creature faded like the rest, before backing up to where Titus stood again, brandishing his sword and preparing for another assault. Titus backed up, his eyes darting around as more creatures emerged from the scattered scales. There were too many. For every one Oren cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. The overpass became a battleground, filled with the shrill cries of the creatures and the sharp ring of Oren's blade against their hardened bodies. Another one attempted to lob a load of darts, which Oren handily deflected, but they were still greatly outnumbered. Titus was not one for praying, but if he had been, his prayers would have been answered when another explosion ripped through the night, but this one was closer and louder. The shockwave threw Titus to the ground, and he scrambled to his knees just in time to see a second projectile slam into the same nearby skyscraper. The blast sent flaming debris raining down, scattering the winged creatures like leaves in a storm. The building groaned, its structure buckling under the impact. "Oren," Titus started, his voice catching as the skyscraper's upper floors began to tilt. With a deafening crack, the building gave way. It teetered for a moment before collapsing entirely, its massive frame plunging sideways toward the overpass. Titus's heart leapt into his throat as he saw the building looming larger and larger in their direction, falling straight on them. Without thinking, he lunged forward, grabbing Oren by the shoulder and shoving him out of the way. The structure shuddered violently as the weight of the fallen skyscraper smashed into the overpass. The grizzled warrior stumbled but kept his footing, turning to glare at Titus for a brief moment before looking back at the destruction. The building had come to rest precariously on the overpass, its side crushed and smouldering. The section of the overpass beneath it groaned under the weight, cracks splintering out among the supports. Titus felt the ground shift beneath his feet, the walkway sinking slightly as the overpass began to give way. "This thing's not going to hold," he shouted, backing away as the steel warped and bent around the building's massive weight. Oren's voice cut through the chaos. "Move, now!" Without hesitation, Oren leapt onto the fallen building, sprinting across its width with an agility that belied his size. Titus didn't have time to think. The overpass gave another lurch, and he followed, his boots hitting the slanted concrete on the building's side with a jarring thud. The heat from the fires inside the building radiated through the cracked concrete and shattered glass. Tidus's feet slipped on the uneven surface, shards of glass crunching under his boots. He scrambled forward, his arms pumping as he fought to keep his balance. Flames licked at the edges of the structure, casting an eerie orange glow over the chaotic scene. A section of the building shifted beneath him, sinking further into the crumbling overpass. Tidus gritted his teeth and pushed harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he raced toward Oren, who was already nearing the edge. The overpass gave a final, thunderous groan, and Tidus felt the ground beneath him collapse. With a desperate burst of speed, he leapt forward, his body hurtling through the air, just as the section of overpass gave way entirely, dragging the building down with it. Tidus's leap carried him forward, but not far enough. His outstretched fingers scraping the edge of the remaining walkway as he fell short, gravity pulling him down toward the chaos below. For a terrifying instant, he hung in the air, weightless, with only the abyss of the collapsing structure beneath him. Then a hand shot out, strong and unyielding, grabbing him around the forearm. The force of the grip wrenched him upward with shocking power, his momentum snapping to a halt as his body dangled precariously over the edge. Tidus's eyes darted up and met Oren's over the rim of his sunglasses. He strained with the effort, his muscles taut as he hauled Tidus up with a laboured motion. The world blurred for Tidus, the sounds of destruction fading as his focus narrowed on that moment. With one final pull, Oren dragged Tidus onto the remaining walkway. He sprawled out onto the steel, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Trying to stand, he doubled over, his hands gripping his knees, coughing hard as the smoke, dust, and raw exertion took their toll. Every muscle in his body felt like it was on fire. He wanted to say something, maybe thank Oren, but words failed him. Oren's hand settled firmly on his shoulder, the weight steadying. Oren said, his tone as calm as if nothing had happened. We're expected. Tidus looked up at him, disbelief flashing across his face, but Oren had already turned and started walking. The crimson robes fluttered faintly in the breeze as he marched forward along the walkway, unshaken and resolute. Tidus staggered to his feet, every instinct telling him to turn and run back to somewhere, but he followed. There really was nowhere else to go now. What remained of the Zanarkand overpass was clear now, the walkway leading out of the city and directly toward the ocean. The sounds of explosions had faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the distant crackle of flames. As they drew closer to the coastline, Tidus noticed something unsettling. The ocean moved. Not like waves rolling toward the shore, but something deeper, more deliberate. The water began to rise, bulging unnaturally as if something immense was shifting beneath the surface. What? Tidus began, his voice trailing off as the water swelled higher. He stopped walking, his legs frozen in place as the truth of what he was seeing struck him. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't a current. It was something colossal. The water climbed impossibly, forming a great hill of liquid that defied every natural law. Then, with a terrible inevitability, the thing beneath it broke the surface. Tidus's words failed him utterly. His body was refusing to move as the creature rose higher and higher, its massive form dwarfing everything around it. The head that emerged first was like a whale's, but grotesquely exaggerated in size, its surface rough and jagged, almost armoured. Dozens of beady black eyes dotted its face, glinting in the dim light like those of a spider. The air around it seemed to warp, shimmering with an unnatural force that made Tidus's stomach churn. Two massive, fin-like appendages emerged next, lifting its enormous body further from the water. The fins weren't graceful or sleek, they were jagged and gnarled and grotesquely powerful, heaving the creature forward with deafening crashes that sent waves surging in every direction. As it rose ever higher, the creature's full scale became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just big, it was a living mountain, a monstrosity that made everything around it look insignificant. Each fin were about the height of the tallest buildings of Zanarkand. Thetis tried to scream, but no sound came out. His voice failed him, choked by the sheer enormity of the thing before him. He wanted to run, to hide, but his legs refused to obey. Oren, however, didn't stop. He walked steadily forward, adjusting the position of the blade resting on his shoulder. Looking at the creature, his expression was steady as he said, "We call it sin." Sin. The name settled in Thetis's mind like a lead weight, but it answered nothing. It only made the terror worse. His gaze remained fixed to the monster against his will. Boats from the marina, entire piers, and even sections of nearby buildings were being lifted into the air by some unseen force. The creature seemed to exert its own gravitational pull. The closer they got, the more the walkway beneath Thetis's feet began to vibrate, as if it too knew the monster was close. "Oren!" Thetis shouted, finding his voice again, though it cracked with fear. "What's happening? What's going on?" Oren didn't answer. He continued his march forward, steps steady and deliberate. Thetis's eyes widened as he realized the walkway itself was moving, sliding inexorably towards Sin. The steel and concrete groaned under the force, the entire structure being drawn toward the monstrous being like a moth to a flame. Panic surged in Thetis's chest as the creature loomed larger and larger. The air seemed to thrum with its presence, an oppressive weight pressing down on him from every direction. He stumbled, struggling to keep his footing as the walkway shifted beneath him, tilting slightly toward the ocean. "Oren!" he shouted again, his voice rising in desperation. "We can't keep going! This thing, it's going to kill us!" Oren stopped walking, his boots planting firmly on the trembling walkway. Thetis nearly collided with him, his eyes wide with panic. The older man's gaze remained fixed on Sin, unflinching even as the beast's massive body began to heave itself onto the coastline. With each thunderous step, it crushed buildings beneath its weight, the structures crumpling like paper as the creature advanced. The air grew still, the explosions from earlier now entirely gone. The silence was deafening, broken only by the groaning of steel and the distant roar of waves. Thetis's mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic mess, when Oren finally spoke again, as if answering his unspoken fear. "We've been spotted." Thetis's heart stopped. He looked at Sin, his blood running cold as he saw the creature's pitch-black eyes all trained on them. The warped air around it seemed to shimmer more violently, distorting everything nearby. Sin moved with terrifying purpose, its massive fins smashing aside the buildings it couldn't fit between. Each step sent tremors through the ground, its looming form casting an immense shadow over the walkway. Thetis stumbled backwards, his hands shaking as he tried to process the sheer scale of the thing before him. It wasn't just big, it was impossible. A living nightmare made flesh. He wanted to run, to do anything, but he was frozen, legs locked in place. Oren didn't move, standing calmly as Sin came closer and closer, a moving mountain. The monster's many eyes seemed to glint, their gaze heavy with a presence Thetis couldn't understand. Oren looked up at it, his voice low but steady. "You are sure?" he asked, his words directed seemingly at the creature itself. Thetis blinked, confusion spiking through his terror. He looked at Oren, his voice breaking as he finally found the strength to speak. "What's going on? What do you mean?" he asked again, feeling as though he should be understanding what's happening. But he simply didn't. Oren slowly turned to him. His expression was solemn. "This is it," he said simply. "What's it?" Thetis shouted, his voice cracking. "What are you talking about? What's happening?" "This is your story," he said. "It all begins here." Oren's voice softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. Titus barely had time to process the words before Sin's massive maw yawned open. The inside of its mouth glowed with an intense white light, growing brighter and brighter with each passing second. The light consumed everything, erasing the darkness, erasing the flames, erasing even the fear. Titus raised his hands to shield his eyes, but the brightness overwhelmed him. He couldn't see. He couldn't hear. For a brief, horrifying moment, the entire world fell silent.